Okay, so we've got some people who have joined us here. My name is Beth Kuchar, and welcome to Innovate Pasadena's Ask Me Anything. We hold these events every couple of weeks on Wednesday at lunchtime, and feature various members of the community who can answer your questions on all things innovation. So today we have joining us Erick Herring, and Erick is actually a board member of Innovate Pasadena, and he's also a CTO with a background in software development, systems engineering, and security. So today, Erick will be answering your questions on cybersecurity. Thank you, Erick, for joining us.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
So do you want to maybe give the audience a little bit of background about yourself? And then we have a few questions that folks submitted ahead of time. So we'll jump right into that after we learn just a touch more about you.
For sure. That sounds terrific. So I've been blessed with a long career, and I've been in and out of operations and security and software development and all its different aspects, mostly on the web. But really across the whole enterprise, and I feel like that's while I'm not a super duper specialist in any particular aspect of security. I feel like maybe that gives me a good place to answer some of these questions from about how security is affecting our lives and the evolution of security over time, and mostly what we should be worried about, what we shouldn't be worried about, both.
Great, thank you. Well, let's start off. We have a couple of questions that were submitted ahead of time by our audience.
Excellent. All right. So this question is, are you able to talk about the culture required in organizations in order to move faster toward digital transformation in fighting cyber threats? That's a good question. And it hits on several things that I think are themes over this evolution of the cybersecurity landscape in the last 5 to 10 years. And the question is framed in the right way because it's an organizational problem and it's a transformational problem. And people used to say, it used to be said that people are the weakest link in your security program. And that's actually, maybe true and maybe not, but it would be more accurate to say they are the primary attack vector into your goodies that you want to protect from the outside world. I don't know if people know about the latest, a recent hack. It's being called the Solarwinds Hack. And it's bad. 18,000 something companies by last count, and that probably undercounts it. People who are in cybersecurity, who are in charge of, in their jobs, in charge of responding to cybersecurity events, are probably going to spend most of 2021 and a good portion of 2022 just figuring out how bad the damage to their enterprise was. And we're not talking about small companies. We're talking about all kinds of companies, including government agencies. And we know from the Office of Personnel Management hack some time ago that government agencies, breaches in government agencies can be very, very bad, right? And so the question is, how do you do something about that? How do you make it part of your digital transformation, is the way I'm reading the question. And I guess I would say that it all comes down to marshaling support and changing behavior. And marshaling support means that security has to be part of everything. It doesn't have to drive everything, and it can't, and it won't. In fact, SANS, the security and oh my God, I forgot what the SANS acronym stands for. It doesn't matter. The organization that gives the premier certification for cybersecurity, they say the primary barriers to awareness and good action to maintain and enhance security are finance and operations executives and companies. And that makes sense, right? Because it costs money and it takes away from efficiency. But until everybody's on board and understands that every aspect of your business has to take security into account, you're going to have little enclaves of people who are fighting the good fight from their perspective and are not tied together, you know. And I think we've seen all over the world, honestly, you know, the COVID response, I think we've seen all over the world what that looks like when you're not taking concerted action. And so we've got like a case study right in front of us in the macro of what this looks like in the micro inside of companies, right? If you've got a security awareness group that's not tied together to the security operations center, if you have one of those, that's not tied together to the compliance people who usually live in the lawyer's office, right? If all those organizations are separate, then you're going to get disjointed action and you're not going to be in anything that feels like a transformative stance relative to mitigating cyber threats. So that was a lot of words. I don't know if that directly addressed the question, but I guess I'll just say that it takes an organizational focus, which has to come from the top. There's no other option. And everybody has to, you know, be helped to understand their role. And just a few more words on that. The Solarwinds hack, the reason I brought that up is because that threat walked into their building, as near as we can tell. And that was a state actor, right? That was Russia. But still, Russia shouldn't be able to, you know, walk into a software purveyor that ends up putting software in almost every enterprise in our nation and makes us vulnerable. That shouldn't be allowed. And for that not to be allowed, people across the organization at that company whose job is to make, you know, software that helps and supports security operations, they would have to care about this. You know, they'd have to upgrade the card reader system. They'd have to review the logs. They'd have to appropriately staff the physical security, you know, not even getting to the data security. And a lot of that stuff is not prioritized and unpopular, you know, because spending money is never popular. So, all right. All right. How did COVID shift security priorities for companies? So I think that the realization that your perimeter, your network perimeter, is much wider than your company's firewalls and routers has been a long time coming. And I think that the people who are responsible for security in companies have fought it tooth and nail. I mean, I doubt there's anybody listening right now who hasn't at some point or another heard one of the reasons why work from home can never possibly be the norm is because of security and keeping track of all of our company's assets and whatnot. And it's amazing what a difference a day makes, right? Now that we have to work from home, you know, for most reasonable values of have to, they're just going to have to figure it out. They are figuring it out, and they're going to have to continue figuring it out. And so I would say that it has brought to the forefront and into focus something that has been true really for a long time. Because when you're sitting at a coffee shop, logged in, you know, via the access point at Starbucks to your company's VPN, sending secure information back and forth, you know, gosh, maybe you work at JPL, you know, maybe you work at the Pentagon. You're still sitting at Starbucks connected to their access point, right? And the security program has got to take that into account. And I think now that with this last year, I think now all organizations have just come to accept that. And I think the budget is flowing to deploy the kinds of tools that are necessary to support it. Sorry, that was a little bit of a long-winded answer, but I think it's a philosophical shift more than anything else for me. I don't think pandemic times have changed a ton beyond making people quit pretending that everyone works in the office.
I know we have a couple more pre-submitted questions here, but I just wanted to jump in because we have a live question from J and V Caballero, which I think kind of fits in with what you were just addressing. So they ask, what tools do you recommend to test and train cybersecurity awareness?
That's an awesome question. Man, I'd love to make a list and share it, right? But it's not that kind of question. Here's what I'll say. SANS has a really terrific program around security awareness. It is end user focused. That is, it's really, when people say security awareness, what they typically mean is, Joe in accounting, or Martha in shipping. And that's important. Like, everybody needs to be aware of how they contribute to security. And when most people think about security awareness, they're like, hey, let's buy a tool that sends phishing emails, sends emails to our employees and tries to get them to click on a link, and then we can go and shake our finger at them and shame them and tell them that they should not have clicked on that link, even though they click on links all day, every day in their email in order to do their job. And while those have their place, and I would argue that place is primarily directed towards the C staff in most companies, those are the people who should not be clicking on those emails. Basically, they shouldn't be allowed to have email. Or they shouldn't be allowed to have links in their email. Yeah, that's it. They can have email, but they shouldn't, including me, by the way, should not be allowed to have any links in our email. Because it turns out I say that because it turns out that the C-suite is a primary vector towards the high value compromises that enter most companies. Either email sent, spam, sent fake from a CEO or a CFO, or email sent to them, it turns out is part of like 60+% of the things that end up costing direct money. When CEO Sally tells you to send a wire transfer, a lot of people just do it. On the order of $14 million a day, I think is the statistic, just in things that target or utilize the email address of CEOs of companies. It's crazy. So the tools that I think are most important, to get back to the question, are really human to human tools. I think you have to talk to people. I think you have to have a training program. The SANS material talks about 5 levels of security awareness sophistication. It goes all the way from nothing and compliance focused. And let's be clear, most security awareness, just like sexual harassment training and all that stuff you do once a year, is compliance focused. It's so they can check a box. And so if they end up getting sued, they being the company, if the company ends up getting sued for something that happened, they at least can't be hit with a negligence claim because they did the minimum required to train you to be aware of security. And that's not unimportant, but there's 3 more levels after that. And the next to last level, the almost nirvana level, is really all about culture change. And continuous improvement. And the only way you get there is by, like I said, making it part of your culture and regularly interacting with people about what makes a good security posture. All right, has the pandemic impacted enterprise cybersecurity? So now that I rambled so long in the previous one, I kind of feel like I answered the majority of this one. I guess maybe the only thing I would add is um, the observation that people I interact with who haven't been super aware of cybersecurity in general appear to have become aware in pandemic times. And I don't know if that's because they don't have an hour commute each way, and so that's 2 hours they have to read news headlines, or because it really is just accelerating so much, it's happening so often. I don't actually know the answer to exactly why it is, but people seem to be more aware, and I think that's a big change. I think when you say ransomware, the vast majority of people will understand what you're talking about, and that wasn't true even 2 years ago. I mean, they could figure it out from the words, right? But they hadn't they didn't know anybody who had experienced. They hadn't experienced it themselves. They hadn't read any headlines about it. And ditto for stalkerware and other things like that. And maybe also there's an element of the fact that our technology is becoming more and more personal. Like every day, it seems. I've got my computer on my wrist. I've got a computer in my pocket. Actually, it's not in my pocket right now. It's over on the table. I've got a computer sitting in front of me. I have 15 or 20 computers within 20 feet of me in my house. And many of those are connected to the internet. Thankfully, none of them have microphones or cameras, as far as I know. But people are having to think about that. And the last thing I'll say is maybe a little unexpected on this topic. I think being at home has been stressful, and if you read the statistics, there has been a huge increase in all sorts of domestic violence and other kinds of things like that. And I guess that's to be expected. But it turns out that a big component of that is around close personal contact, domestic partner abuse of technology, technology to track, technology to surveil, to the point that Apple actually put out a very good guide on this topic about how to manage your security and privacy settings on your personal devices when you're in some danger, or you might be in some danger. And it's 20 pages. Everybody should actually read it. It's super informative and a good initiative. More is needed. So I don't know. That was a little far afield from, I think, the intent of the question, but I thought that was an interesting and important thing to talk about for a second.
So you brought up something interesting just briefly about personal data and data privacy. And I'm curious, this is my question to you now, I'm putting you on the spot.
Right
but
on.
Where do you see us headed in 2021 with data privacy, especially with healthcare and some of the online telehealth issues that the pandemic has kind of brought to light? Do you see that accelerating? Do you see any new trends there?
Oh boy. Well, so that's a big question. And I guess you probably already figured out I'm going to ramble a little bit, so I'm going to ramble at you for a minute. Data is a toxic asset. And I feel that as people, as a society, as companies, as individual actors, in the cyber sphere, for lack of a better way to think about it, I think that is under accepted and underappreciated. Anyone who has data about you is potentially a danger to you. It might be a little d danger, right? But the fact of the matter is that nation state actors, particularly China, as near as we can tell, what the literature calls advanced persistent threats, APTs, if you see that, they're talking about China and Russia for the most part, but we are one too, just to be clear. If you're not within our borders, America is the biggest APT. And they're hoovering up information. You know, the Aetna hack, I think, tons of health information, personal information got hoovered up, and they believe that was China. I hope I'm getting the detail right on that one, but it was a major health insurer, provider of health insurance, was breached by a nation state. I'm pretty sure it was Aetna in China. And they're doing that because they're building profiles, because that data, you know, a lot of it never gets old. I mean, it never ages out. You're always, you know, once you reach a certain age, you're always going to be the height you are, right? Your feet are always going to be the same size. Your eyes are always going to be the same color. Your addresses in the past are never going to change because they're in the past, right? Your social security number is unlikely to change. And all this stuff just sits there, and it accrues, it aggregates over time, you know, a breach here, a breach there. And, you know, pretty soon they have as much information about you as it's possible to have. And the thing is that most people are like, oh, don't worry about it, nothing to hide, right? But that is not a good way to think about it. Not because I want people to walk around in a state of existential dread all the time, which would be easy to do if you really like take all this out to its logical conclusion. I mean, the fact of the matter is, if China wants to know about you, they're going to know about you, and that's just it. But that's the point, right? Is the thing to be worried about here is that it's not targeted, and the tools are getting better and better to sift through large amounts of data every year. And so the thing is, you're not being targeted right now. So your data is being hoovered up, it's being stored, but someday somebody who has access to that data, and you know, now we could be talking about Facebook just as well as China, just to be clear, is going to ask a question. You know, can you tell me all the people that blah 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 blah? Because I want to do, you know, this thing that would be perfectly targeted towards those people. You know, whether that's blackmail them or try and force them to do something, you know, in any way, shape, or form. You know, it all reduces to blackmail, I guess. Or whether that is trying to go after them because you've identified they have something you want, or whatever that is, right? Suddenly, those profiles that have just been sitting there, you know, you weren't targeted; they were just passively hoovered up in other breaches. Suddenly, you are a target. And you're targeted by an algorithm, and you're targeted by the fact that somebody just realized they had a question they could ask and they had data that could answer it. So you're going to have to tell me in a second if I'm answering your question at all, or just raising a bunch of fear, uncertainty, and doubt. That's not my intention. I just think people need to be mindful of the data they're putting out in the world. I mean, actually, I've got a recommendation. This is a really good book, The Smart Girl's Guide to Privacy by Violet Blue. And it's targeted towards women, as you can see from the title, but it's a good read for anybody just talking about data management. And, you know, it's a sad fact that women are at greater risk than men for all sorts of reasons around misuse of personal data. But in the kinds of attacks I'm talking about, everyone is vulnerable. So anyway, did I answer your question at all?
You did answer my question. Thank you.
Awesome. You're welcome.
So we do have a couple minutes left here. So if anyone has a question for Erick, feel free to type it in the Q&A. And yeah, your answer actually reminded me somewhat of a company I came across recently, or it came to my attention, and they allow you to automate data removal requests but they do so by you entering in your email and allowing them to scrape your email and subject lines and basically read all your email. And then they just use machine learning to ping anyone that they think might have personal data. So it seems like a catch-22 to me. use a service like that at your own risk.
Well, I mean, it's an interesting point, right? So let's say they have the best of intentions. Let's even say they have really fabulous security. And the truth is, over time, neither of those two things can be guaranteed because business ownership changes, investors change, emphasis changes. So intentions can change over time. And also, honestly, nobody has that great a security, at least in the face of China, you know, in the face of somebody who's a determined adversary. And so you give it to them, they do the thing they say they're going to do, you know, you've gotten the value that you were promised and everybody should be happy, right? But that data is just sitting there because they also don't realize the toxic asset. The one thing I meant to talk about earlier that I think is, you know, this is like big thought territory, but I think everybody in this country, we're a liability driven country in terms of the way business is run, the way the law is applied, and the way it shapes our world, right? We don't want the coffee to be too hot because somebody might sue us because it spills on their lap, right? And the funny thing is that story has two sides because everybody's like, oh, why didn't she just not spill the coffee on herself? That's stupid. Why would you sue somebody for that? And then the flip side of that is like she was actually seriously injured because the coffee was like 100 degrees hotter than it was supposed to be, right? And so there was a lot of nuance in there. But the point is that that's framed in terms of liability. You don't want the coffee to be too hot because then you'll be liable for any damage that is caused. And that doesn't serve us in the world of security. So a specific example that I was thinking a lot about this week, and I don't have anything super profound to say about it, but I'm going to put it out there for the audience, right? A hack happened recently, and it happened to people who had old software. So if you hadn't upgraded your software, and this is an enterprise software, so this was a pretty serious breach for the companies that were affected. And so if you hadn't upgraded your software, you were vulnerable to the hack. And everybody got really mad at the vendor. And they were like, what kind of liability do they have? Sue them out of existence. And that's not a wrong answer, right? Of course they should have some liability, but that's a double-edged sword. Like, are we going to pass laws that mandate updates? Do you have to pay for the next version if the company's been sending you emails for 3 years telling you that you've got an old version of the software and you need to, you know, get the new version? Or should we require them to give you the new version for free if it includes security fixes? Are they not allowed to charge money for their work? And so all of those are really interesting questions, and we don't really ever get to answer them because what happens is the breach happens and then lawsuits fly back and forth, and we don't actually fix the system that created the problem in the first place. And so I don't know what to do about that, but I'm thinking a lot about it because a lot of our security posture and our security thinking is driven by our legal system and driven by our concepts of how liability applies.
That is so true. You know, I know we are almost out of time here, but do you have a few minutes for one additional question? We have another question that came in from the audience.
For sure.
Okay, so Paula asks, how are AI and/or the potential of quantum computing affecting encryption and other security concerns in the industry?
That's an interesting question. I'm not an expert, so you know this is you're going to get the popular science version of this, and I bet we could get somebody from Caltech who could really answer the crap out of this question. Pardon my French. But I will say. First off, I'll separate the questions. So I don't think AI, I think AI is important, and it's important in the way that security threats are going to evolve over time. And so I'll talk about that briefly in a second. But I don't think it particularly affects encryption. But quantum computing is going to be, you know, is going to be a big deal. And this is a different version of the problem of the data pooling up over time problem I was just talking about, right? Because even though research is already developing, has developed, and is continuing to develop quantum hard encryption, And the encryption we use, to be clear, the encryption we use when quantum computing finally happens, the encryption that we use will be ready. The new encryption that you have on your things will be ready. But all the other stuff will still be there. The doorbell that you bought from Ring that sits on your front porch and has a computer and a camera and a microphone in it is still going to be running the old encryption. And the company, that's a bad example because Amazon will likely be around, but I bet you they won't update it. I bet you that camera, if it's sufficiently old, will never get an update. They'll be like, our firmware doesn't support versions of the camera. You can buy a new one, right? And, people are not going to do that. And people are not going to have the latest version of the operating system. They are not going to upgrade every firewall and every edge device and every server and, right? And so we're going to have all these things laying around that are vulnerable. Think about cryptocurrencies. Like cryptocurrency suddenly becomes easily snarfable if you can just factor the prime numbers. And so by the time we get there, all of that will have been upgraded, right? All the crypto algorithms they're using will be upgraded. There'll be chain migrations and all sorts of things. But guess what? You can't just make the old Bitcoins go away. They're still going to be sitting there. And there's Bitcoins that haven't moved since they were created. Big wallets full of Bitcoins that haven't moved. And the first person who has access to the right kind of quantum technology, if they want to, they're going to get all of them. They're just going to be moved, and then they'll be upgraded to the new encryption. Safe and sound in somebody's newly encrypted wallet. But the person who notionally owned them, I guess they were abandoned, I don't know, but the person who owned them is not going to have them anymore. And that's going to be at all levels across everything. You can imagine the power plant is not going to have updated encryption in time. And that should be concerning. AI is different. I think AI is a tool that allows, I think AI is a tool that amplifies the asymmetries in our relationships, and people, it would be good if people internalize that, the fact that you suddenly can just have the computer do things that humans had to do. And I'm not talking about artificial general intelligence or anything like that. You don't need anything that fancy, right? You just need something that can read everything and craft attacks based on what it read. And AI can certainly do that now with the newest developments in natural language processing and whatnot. And there's probably a million other ways it increases the asymmetry. So people who have access to those tools are going to be able to scale their attacks in a way that they can't right now. And even if it's only used to identify targets, we're back to, what I was talking about a little bit earlier. We could use AI to identify targets. So what if I wanted to find people who have a Chase account that is secured by a certain kind of thing, and the AI can just help you do that if you ask it the right question the right way. It can do it based on all sorts of signals. It doesn't have to go and find a Facebook post that says, I have a Chase account and it's unsecured, right? They're going to go and find, Facebook posts, Twitter posts, emails, whatever, that have words that lead the AI to believe that you might be one of these customers. And, if it's 70% right, that's pretty good. And so, pretty bad, good for the criminal. So anyhow, that's how I think AI is going to play into all this, or that's a way that AI is going to play into all this. It's going to make it harder and harder to be a human living in this unsecured world, at peace, being left alone.
Great. Well, I realize we're a little bit over on our time here. Any last words for folks, or do you have to get going?
If people have more questions, I could take one more. But if not, I will just say, stay safe out there. Set your devices to be private. Don't let people have your info. And if you're in a position of authority, like help your company prioritize security, because it's not a problem until it is.
Exactly. And one last time, you did mention a book that you said was a good resource. Can you say the name of that book again?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's lots of good resources, and if people have any interest, I'll share in any topic people have questions about. But the one I was referencing is The Smart Girl's Guide to Privacy, and the author is Violet Blue.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Eric, for joining us, talking a little bit about cybersecurity. Hopefully folks walk away feeling like they can get ready and protect themselves, not additionally scared. That's definitely not the intention, right? But
Right
thank you, and thank you for your support as a board member of Innovate Pasadena. We definitely appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining us in the audience.